Well, good Sunday morning, folks. It is August the 23rd, and I'm so glad that you're tuning in for Bible study. If you're joining us for the first time, thanks a bunch. We're working our way through the book of Proverbs, and we're beginning with chapter 6. And so if you've got your Old Testaments with you and you want to join us, if you want to follow along, you're obviously joining us. If you want to follow along, you'll want to turn to chapter 6. I hope that you'll do that as we continue to look at this book that's all about wise living. You know, I've said this once, I've said it twice, I've probably said it 3 or 4 times. What the book of Proverbs is all about is principles that will largely determine the success or failure in almost every major area of life. That's pretty heavy, that's pretty significant. That should behoove us to give a lot of attention to this book. You know, and it also reminds us that God actually wants us to have success in all the major areas of life. Of course, what He's mostly concerned about is the success in our relationship with Him. He wants us to have a healthy, thriving relationship with Him. He wants us to spend eternity with Him. But also, while we're living in this world, He wants us to experience success. In other words, He wants our relationships to be healthy. He wants our relationship with our wife, our marriage, to be healthy and thriving. He wants our relationship with our children to be healthy and thriving. He wants us to find satisfaction and success in our work life. We could go on and on. Well, the very fact that this book is here shows us that He cares about those things as well. So with that in mind, as we continue to ponder wise living, His counsel for wise living, let's take a look at chapter 6. Okay, we'll read a few verses. We'll read the first 5 verses, then we'll make some observations. Let's start. My son, if you have become surety for your neighbor, have given a pledge for a stranger, if you have been snared with the words of your mouth, have been caught with the words of your mouth, do this then, my son, and deliver yourself. Since you have come into the hand of your neighbor, go, humble yourself, and importune your neighbor. Give no sleep to your eyes, nor slumber to your eyelids. Deliver yourself like a gazelle from the hunter's hand, and like a bird from the hand of the fowler. Okay, what are these verses all about? Well, these verses are all about, and most of you can recognize it just from that reading. These verses are all about legal entanglements and avoiding legal entanglements that are beyond our control. Let's take a look at it. Let's peel back some of the layers here. Unpack this thing. Look at verse 1. My son, if you have become surety for your neighbor. Now, what does that mean? Well, if you've got the ESV, it's a little bit more clear. It says, if you have put up security for your neighbor. The second part of verse 1, have given a pledge for your neighbor. What he's saying, again, is avoid legal entanglements that are beyond your control. Now, some people say this is all about co-signing a note. Do not co-sign a note with anyone. Don't put yourself at risk. When you co-sign a note, you're putting yourself at risk. You're trusting the person for whom you've co-signed. You're trusting them to do the right thing, to meet their obligations. But you're at risk because if something happens, if they don't, then you're on the hook. Now, it is true, that's what he says here. But I don't believe that he's just saying, don't co-sign a note. That's not wise. I think what he's saying is, again, it's broader than just co-signing a note. It is, don't get into legal entanglements and indebtedness in which the circumstances are beyond your control. Now, this is not, despite what some people say, this does not forbid taking on legal responsibilities for another person. God doesn't prohibit that. It's not a sin if you do that. In fact, if you've got your New Testaments, just kind of, let's hold our place there in Proverbs 6. We'll come back, obviously. But go over to the book of Philemon. And remember this little one chapter book here, Paul is writing to his co-worker, Philemon. And he's making a plea for a servant of Philemon's by the name of Onesimus. And so he's imploring Philemon to treat him like a brother. But look what he says. Down in verse 17 and 18. If then you regard me as a partner, accept him as you would me. And then look at verse 18. But if he has wronged you in any way, or owes you anything, charge that to my account. Paul says, I will be responsible for him. I'm going to be legally responsible. I will be responsible for whatever it is he owes you. So the Bible clearly doesn't forbid us from taking on the legal responsibilities of another person. What the writer here is saying is, it's just not wise. It's just not wise to offer your possessions as collateral for another person's debt. It's just not a wise thing to do. Now, again, it's not forbidden. It's just not wise. I think most of us probably have co-signed a note with our children, maybe for a school loan or something like that. Maybe even for their, if they're purchasing a vehicle, and that we've done that. But if we do that, hopefully you consider a couple of things. Number one, hopefully they have demonstrated that they are responsible. They have demonstrated that they have earning potential, and they've demonstrated that you can really trust them. And also, whatever it is that you're co-signing for, whatever amount that it is, you know it is not going to be a devastating blow to you if suddenly you bear that legal responsibility. I think we've all been there. And so again, this is not, it's not forbidding that. And so I don't want to suggest that you should, under no circumstances for, you know, a family member or a child, that this prohibits that. It doesn't. It's just saying, listen, it is not wise to get yourself in legal entanglements that are beyond your control, to offer your possessions as collateral for another person's debt. Far too many times I have seen people do this, and it has really come back to devastate them financially. They did it for maybe a child, a family member that wasn't responsible, that didn't have earning potential, that wasn't trustworthy, and they couldn't, and whatever it is they co-signed for, if suddenly they found themselves legally responsible, it was going to be devastating to them personally, and they still did it. That was unwise, and I've seen it, and all of its just devastating effects. And so we need to keep that in mind. So that's what he's saying here. Listen, think very carefully before you do anything like this. In fact, he says, if you do this, if you make such a pledge, he is recommending this. Now remember, this is divine counsel. Do whatever is needed to get out from under it. That is his counsel. Do whatever is needed to get out from under it, even to the point of losing face. Look at verse 3. Do this then, my son, and deliver yourself, since you've come into the hand of your neighbor. Go humble yourself, importune your neighbor. Now that's what the New American Standard says, importune your neighbor. Again, that's a kind of a word. We don't importune people too much in our vocabulary. Again, the ESV, plead urgently with. Again, you're even if you have to lose face, it's not a good position to be in. Do everything that is in your power to get out of that arrangement. And that's the image that he uses in verse 5. Deliver yourself like a gazelle from the hunter's hand and like a bird from the hand of the fowler. I am sure that so many of you, like myself, have been have really been a fan of Dave Ramsey. Dave has blessed a lot of people in terms of personal finance. His counsel, his wisdom is solid. I have led the Financial Peace University at this congregation. It's been several years. It's time to do that again pretty soon. I've done it at every church I've been to. I've been to several live events. I'm a fan. And if you are, and if you've listened to him much, you know this passage plays a central part in his step to get out of debt. When you find yourself in debt, he talks about to get out of debt, you have to have gazelle intensity. You know, the image of a cheetah chasing a gazelle across the African savanna. That cheetah is the fastest land animal on earth, but most of the time that gazelle escapes. Man, because he is bobbing, he is weaving, he is intense. And Dave says you got to get that kind of intensity. You got to get that kind of focus. Well, he uses this passage, and that's fair. This is a good use of that passage. That's what he's saying. Deliver yourself like a gazelle from the hunter's hand. So it's not a good place to be. It is not wise to get yourself in legal entanglements, to offer your possessions as collateral for another person's debt. It is just not wise. And if you find yourself in that position, you should do everything you can to get out of that. Okay, the next counsel for us, verses 6 through 11. He's dealing with laziness here. You want to succeed in life? Ain't going to happen if you're lazy. Just is not going to happen. Take a look at it, verse 6. Go to the ant, O sluggard. Let's just read through verse 11. Go to the ant, O sluggard, observe her ways and be wise, which, having no chief officer or ruler, prepares her food in the summer, gathers her provision in the harvest. How long will you lie down, O sluggard? When will you arise from your sleep? A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding to the hands to rest. Your poverty will come in like a vagabond, and your need like an armed man. Okay. One way to get wisdom, we learn, God tells us, is through observation. Observation is a great way to get wisdom. And one of the ways is to observe nature. And observing ants can be helpful. Ants are models of diligence. Ants are models of self-discipline, self-motivation. Look, it says in verse 7, they don't have a chief, they don't have an officer, they don't have a ruler. Nobody's cracking the whip. And have you ever seen ants just kind of lounging around watching TV? I haven't. I haven't seen them in the rocking chair. I haven't seen them in the hammock. Not that there's anything wrong with a rocking chair or a hammock or watching TV. When I get my opportunity, I avail myself of all three of those things. He's saying these are some of the most, they are always busy, and they are always diligent, and they're always moving, and they're always preparing. And he says, you can learn something for that. What they do, verse 8, is they prepare, it says, prepares her food in the summer, gathers her provision in the harvest. They see the larger picture of life. Oh, that's so much. People who succeed in life see the bigger picture of life. They prepare their food in the summer and gather her provision in the harvest. They know that there is a time when they can't gather food, that they gather food now. You make hay while the sun shines, we say. That's our own proverb. We make hay while the sun is shining. We see the bigger picture of the realities of life. Sometimes we may be too old to work. We may be too injured to work. We may be unable to find work. And so we have to use wisdom. We know how life works. And so when we know how life works, we understand that we can't be lazy, that we're going to have to prepare. In good times, we got to prepare for bad times. And so that's the picture here. And if we don't, he says in verse 9, how long will you lie down and sleep? When will you arise from your sleep? And then he pictures him saying, a little more, please, let me get just a little more sleep. Just another hour. Let me have just a little bit more rest. The point is that he's making here, he says, if that's your thinking in life, if you're lazy, he says, your poverty is going to come in like a vagabond and your need like an armed man. Now, the point, it almost sounds like it's going to come on you suddenly, like it says, some translations say that it's going to come in, it almost makes it sound like, some translations say a robber. It makes it sound like you get ambushed, that out of nowhere, when you're least expecting it, it's going to happen. I don't think that's the idea. In fact, Hebrew scholars say a better word is like a vagrant, or the New American Standard says your poverty will come like a vagabond, but a vagrant. And your need, like it says, an armed man in the New American Standard, but a better word there is a beggar, not a bandit. So it's not that if you're lazy, your poverty will come on you. It'll come on you suddenly, like an ambush. The idea is that it's going to hang all over you like an incorrigible beggar that is always around and just wanting more and more and more. I don't know. I've been to certain parts of the world that are impoverished, and many of you have too. You've been in the third world, and really, when you go to a third world place, you really kind of get a sense of this, because there are some places that you'll go where people who are begging will be hard to get away from. They will be all over you. And that's kind of the picture here. And that's what he's saying here. If this is your approach to life, you're not going to win. You're always going to be struggling. It is always going to be hanging around you. So again, it's not going to come on you suddenly like an ambush. It's just always going to be hanging on you. Your poverty will come in like a vagabond and your need like a beggar. Don't be lazy. God even has stuff to say about laziness in the New Testament. Turn over, for instance, to 2 Thessalonians chapter 3. 2 Thessalonians chapter 3. Look down about verse 8. Paul says, nor did we eat anyone's bread without paying for it, but with labor and hardship we kept working night and day so that we would not be a burden to any of you. Not because we do not have the right to do this, but in order to offer ourselves as a model for you so that you would follow our example. God expects His people not to be lazy, to be industrious, to work. And then he says, verse 10, for even when we were with you, we used to give you this order. If anyone is not willing to work, then he is not to eat either. And then he says, for we hear that some of you are leading an undisciplined life, doing no work at all, but acting like busybodies. Now, such persons we command and exhort in the Lord Jesus Christ to work in a quiet fashion and eat their own bread. So God has a lot to say about what He expects His people to be and how He's kind of designed life. And that is, He expects us to be industrious. He expects us to work. He wants us to work. And if we're lazy, there are going to be consequences in life. We will not succeed in life if we're lazy. We will not. Okay, look at verse 12. Let's read a few verses. Verses 12 through 15. Shall we? A worthless person, a wicked man is the one who walks with a perverse mouth, who winks with his eyes, who signals with his feet, who points with his fingers, who with perversity in his heart continually devises evil. He goes at the end of verse 14, who spreads strife. Therefore his calamity will come suddenly. Instantly he will be broken, and there will be no healing. Okay, who's he talking about here? This worthless person, this scoundrel. A wicked man, he says there, is one who walks with a perverse mouth. This is the person who is working to undermine social and personal relationships for his own benefit. It's people who are so consumed with themselves. They are all about manipulation. They are all about deception. And they are all about ruining people. They don't care whose relationships are ruined. They don't care about anything. They'll do anything for their own benefit. And they're going to always be plotting malice against someone and stirring up dissension. Look at some of the language again. The second part of verse 12, he walks with a perverse mouth. Okay, that's deception. But not only that, look at verse 13. He winks with his eyes, who signals with his feet. This implies efforts at deception, winking with the eye. We even recognize that, and manipulation. Who points with his fingers, makes accusations against certain people. So they're stirring up tension among others. They're creating strife in society. Now listen, you don't really think anybody does that, do you? You don't think people go about creating strife socially, do you? You don't think people really do that for their own benefit. You don't think people manipulate and deceive and lie, do you? Oh my goodness. That's been going on since Genesis chapter 3. And we see it all the time. It is with social media and a camera in every hand in this world. We can see it in living color 24/7. People who are so consumed with their own interests, they will spin and lie and manipulate and deceive and sow dissension and strife for their own benefit. And what he says here at the end, look at verse 15, after he says in verse 14, who spread strife, therefore his calamity will come suddenly, instantly he will be broken and there will be no healing. This type of person, his destruction is certain. It is certain. Whether it's here or in the future, it is certain. Do not be this type of person. Do not be the person who sows strife. Do not be the person who deceives and manipulates and lies. And because you're trying to get some kind of personal advantage. Do not be that kind of person. The end will be disaster. Look at verse 16. There are 6 things which the Lord hates. Yes, 7 which are an abomination to Him. Haughty eyes, a lying tongue, and innocent hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked plans, feet that run rapidly to evil, a false witness who utters lies, and one who spreads strife among brothers. Okay, as we look at verse 16 through 19 here, the medieval church had a list of 7 deadly sins. They were pride, anger, envy, impurity, gluttony, slothfulness, and avarice. Those were the 7 deadly sins of the medieval church. Well, here Proverbs provides us with a list of what we might think of as the Israelite version of the deadly sins, 7 deadly sins. These are the things that break covenant with God. And not only do they break covenant with God, but they disrupt the life of the community. And let's take a look at it. Each of these first 5 of these 7 is associated with a body part. These represent distorted personalities that are behind these actions. Let's look at it. Haughty eyes. That is a reference to an arrogant spirit. Arrogant spirits God despises. A lying tongue, no regard for the truth. God despises that. Hands that shed innocent blood. This is the person who lacks control over anger. He lacks regard for human life. A heart that devises wicked plans. In other words, a person that doesn't care for anything except which works to his advantage. That's the only thing he cares about. Feet that run rapidly to evil. This is the person that's enthusiastic for chances to do wrong. A false witness who utters lies. These are people who subvert the justice system. They bring communities into chaos with their lies. And one who spreads strife among brothers. You know, he mentioned spreading strife at the end of verse 14. God just hates those who spread strife among the community. And these things, we ought to take the heart that the person whose eyes, hands, and feet carry out these kinds of deeds has a twisted soul and grossly corrupts the image of God that we should be reflecting, that should be recognized in every human being. Let's look at verse 20. Verses 20 through 35, beginning here in verse 20 through the rest of the chapter, he gets back to that adulteress. Well, we just looked at this in chapter 5, but here we go again. Warning against the adulteress. In ancient times and in modern times, parents, were concerned about the sexual future of their children. And they want them to have a fulfilling marriage. They want them to have a God-honoring marriage. They want them to have a joyful marriage. They want them to be in a right relationship with God. And so, this is such an important dimension to that. This is such a threat to a happy marriage, a joyful marriage, and a relationship with God, adultery. And so he's right back at it. Take a look. My son, observe the commandment of your father. Don't forsake the teaching of your mother. Bind them continually on your heart. Tie them around your neck. In other words, this means this is absolutely vital for your survival. We saw that kind of language back in chapter 5, and we're seeing it again here. When you walk about, they will guide you. When you sleep, they will watch over you. And when you awake, they will talk to you. I love that verse. I love verse 22. The father's instruction, the mother's instructions are teachings that are personified as a guide and as a guardian and as a companion. That's a great picture. The teaching of a wise father, a wise mother, is like a guide in life. It's like a guardian in life. It's like a companion in life. When you walk about, they'll guide you. When you sleep, they'll watch over you. When you wake, they'll talk to you. For the commandment is a lamp and the teaching is a light. I love how these teachings are objectified here as a lamp that shows us the way. There is nothing more frustrating than not being able to see which is the right way to take. Where's the right path? And that's the image here. This is going to show you the right path that it takes And reproofs for discipline are the way of life, the end of verse 23. To keep you from the evil woman, from the smooth tongue of the adulteress. So listen to what I'm saying to you. It's going to guide you. It's going to guard you. It's going to keep you. It's going to keep you from this. Verse 25, do not desire her beauty in your heart. Do not let her capture you with her eyelids. I like this again, how verse 25 doesn't conceal the fact that she's going to be alluring and even beautiful to the young man. She's going to be beautiful and alluring at times. But don't be deceived. No matter how beautiful she looks, no matter how alluring she is deadly. She is deadly. Take a look at it. Don't let her desire her beauty in your heart. Don't let her capture you with her eyelids. For on account of a harlot, one is reduced to a loaf of bread, and an adulteress hunts for the precious life. Now, verse 26 is, Hebrew scholars say it's actually very difficult to understand this verse in Hebrew, and there's really a couple of possibilities. One thing that he might be saying is, look, the fee for a prostitute is like a loaf of bread. But for an adulteress, it's the loss of life. For an account of a harlot, one is reduced to a loaf of bread. An adulteress hunts for the precious life. You fall into adultery, it's going to cost you your life. The point is, whether we can really understand with precision what this means in detail, we know what he's saying, though, there in verse 26. And it's meant to emphasize the danger and the folly of adultery. Look at verse 27 and through 29. Can a man take fire in his bosom and his clothes not be burned? Or can a man walk on hot coals and his feet not be scorched? So is the one who goes in to his neighbor's wife. Whoever touches her will not go unpunished. Listen, the price may seem cheap, but ultimately, it's going to take your life, is what he says. Look, you can't play with this and win. You can't play with this and thrive. It is going to be, the consequences are going to be deadly. You cannot escape the consequences of adultery. You pursue that kind of life, there will be devastating consequences. There will be devastating consequences here, and there would be devastating consequences when we stand before God. Look at verse 30. I know we're at 32 minutes here. Give me a couple more, okay? We'll wind this chapter up. Men do not despise a thief if he steals to satisfy himself when he's hungry, but when he is found, he must repay sevenfold. He must give all the substance of his house. Okay, what he's doing here, beginning in verse 30 through 35, now he's still talking about adultery. And he's kind of developing what's called a how much more argument. If this is bad, then how much more is this bad? And so what he says here, when he says, men do not despise a thief if he steals to satisfy himself when he's hungry, but if he's found, he has to pay it back. What he's saying is, look, a community may understand a thief that steals. They may understand their circumstance of life may be so awful that it drives that person to do something that we can understand. It doesn't make it right. And that's what he's saying. It doesn't make it right, and he still has to pay for his crime. But there's a sense of, there can be a sense of compassion depending on the circumstance. Well, what he's going to go on to say then is, but when it comes to adultery, no. Nobody has any compassion for an adulterer. Nobody in the community is going to go, well, poor guy, I get it. No, this is not about need. This is about lust in every circumstance. And so that's what he says in verse 32. He says, the one who commits adultery with a woman is lacking sense. He who would destroy himself does it. wounds and disgrace he will find. You're going to be a disgrace. Again, a thief, a hungry person who takes something to feed himself or his child. We know it's not right, and he has to pay for his crime, but we can understand there's some compassion there. But not for an adulterer. Wounds and disgrace he'll find. His reproach will not be blotted out. For jealousy enrages a man, and he will not spare in the day of vengeance. He will not accept any ransom, nor will he be satisfied, though you give many gifts. Another practical consequence of adultery that he mentions here is you might just face the fury of a jealous and enraged husband. He's saying, son, you're going to have a lot of consequences. You go down this path, it's going to destroy you. It's going to destroy you in the eyes of your community. You're going to be a disgrace. No one's going to feel any sympathy for you. And on top of that, you may find yourself on the receiving end of some real trouble from the man whose wife you stole. So again, when it comes to wise living and winning in all the different areas of life, oh, God gives us so much guidance here. And again, we see in back-to-back chapters this emphasis on sexual purity that has ruined many a person in life. Okay, well, we'll call it quits there. We'll pick up with chapter 7 next week. And we're probably going to do 2 chapters in our next lesson, chapter 7 and chapter 8. That is the goal. And so until then, thanks for joining me again for Bible study. Stay safe. God bless. Lord willing, I'll see you real soon.